It started off like any regular evening, nothing out of the ordinary, or so I thought. I'd gotten home late from work again, the kind of late that had become my new normal thanks to the endless demands at the construction site. The job had been draining me, both physically and mentally, leaving little room for anything else in my life. My boots were caked with dust, my muscles ached, and all I wanted was a quiet evening to unwind. When I pushed open the front door, expecting the usual dim glow of the hallway light and the faint hum of the TV from the living room, there was Megan, my wife. She greeted me with a smile, but something about her felt off. She wasn't dressed in her usual comfy attire, no baggy sweatpants, no oversized hoodie she'd practically lived in. Instead, she was wearing this sleek, form-fitting black dress that hugged her figure in ways I hadn't seen in years. Her hair was perfectly styled, not a single strand out of place, and there was makeup, subtle but enough to accentuate her features. Even the air smelled different. A soft, floral perfume lingered, one I didn't recognize. It wasn't her usual scent. I stood there in the doorway for a moment, thrown off by the unexpected change. "What's the occasion?" I asked casually, my eyes involuntarily sweeping her from head to toe. She laughed lightly, brushing off my question like it was nothing. "Oh, nothing special. Just thought I'd mix things up a bit. You're always telling me to treat myself, remember?" I nodded, forcing a smile, even though my mind was already spinning. Megan wasn't the type to dress up for no reason. But I didn't push it. I never had been one to pry unless there was a clear reason. Still, the image of her standing there, polished and glowing, stayed with me longer than I wanted to admit. The next morning, I left early to oversee the crew at the site. It was one of those crisp mornings where the air felt fresh, full of possibilities, but my head was clouded with the memory of Megan's sudden transformation. On my way home for a quick lunch break, something else caught my attention. A car I didn't recognize parked near our house. It was an older model Toyota Camry, the once vibrant paint faded and chipped, windows slightly fogged from the morning dew. I assumed it belonged to a neighbor's guest at first. There was a guy down the street whose brother visited occasionally, and his car looked a bit like that. But when I pulled back into the driveway later that evening, the same Camry was still there. A man sat inside, his baseball cap pulled low, face partially hidden. As soon as he noticed me looking his way, he quickly turned his head, pretending to fiddle with something on the dashboard. It wasn't enough to raise full-blown suspicion, but it was odd. Odd enough that I made a mental note of the license plate. Not because I thought it meant anything yet, it just didn't sit right. That night, Megan was her usual self again. She talked about her day, mostly mundane work stuff, while I half listened, distracted by emails on my phone. I didn't mention the Camry. It felt premature to stir up something over what could have been nothing. But I'd be lying if I said I wasn't glancing out the window more than usual, half expecting to see that fogged-up windshield again. Then came the third thing. The thing that really got under my skin. I was in the kitchen, tidying up, a rare habit for me, but the clutter had started to bother me. As I moved a stack of mail off the counter, a crumpled receipt fell to the floor. I picked it up, smoothing out the creases, and saw it was from Riverside, a fancy little restaurant we'd only been to a couple of times for special occasions. The total? $112. The date? Just 2 days ago. The timestamp read 1:25 p.m. I stared at it, trying to piece together why it was there. Megan had mentioned having a lunch meeting with a client that day. She'd been casual about it, saying it was nothing out of the ordinary. That evening, over dinner, I decided to slip the topic into conversation, as casually as I could. "Hey, how'd that meeting with the client go?" She didn't even flinch. Looked up from her plate with an easy smile. "Oh, it went fine. Just talked through some details. Nothing too exciting." Her tone was smooth. Convincing, even. But something about that receipt gnawed at me. I knew her company's policies. They rarely entertained clients, and definitely not at high-end places like Riverside where a single entree could set you back $40. They were the type to squeeze every penny. Curiosity got the better of me the next day. On my way home, I made a detour to Riverside. It's the kind of spot overlooking the water, where couples celebrate anniversaries or business deals get sealed with a handshake. I walked in like I belonged, under the pretense of ordering a coffee to go. While I waited, I struck up a casual conversation with the bartender. "Busy week?" I asked, glancing around the polished bar. Always busy around lunch, he replied, wiping down the counter. I pulled the receipt from my pocket, trying to sound nonchalant. Hey, do you remember this table from a couple days ago? He squinted at it, then nodded slowly. Yeah, I think so. That was a couple sitting in the corner by the window. They stayed for a while. A couple. Megan had made no mention of anyone else. That was all I needed to hear. I thanked him, grabbed my coffee, and left, my heart pounding harder with every step. Megan wasn't the type to leave out details, especially when it came to work. But she had. And now, all the little things, the new perfume, the strange car, the receipt, they were starting to connect in ways I didn't want to admit. I didn't confront her. Not yet. That's not my style. I'm not the kind of guy who jumps to conclusions without the facts. But from that moment on, I knew something was wrong. I just had to figure out what. The next morning, I woke up with a different mindset. I wasn't going to let emotions get the better of me. Not yet. That's not who I am. I've always been the type to approach things methodically, with a clear head. No scenes, no confrontations without solid proof. If something was happening, I wasn't about to tip my hand too early. I needed to be smart about this. So, I decided to play it cool. Act like everything was normal. Megan was already in the kitchen when I came downstairs, humming softly as she poured herself a cup of coffee. She looked up, flashed me that warm, easy smile, the kind that would have fooled me completely just a few weeks ago. But now I was studying her. Every move, every word, every little detail. The way she stirred her coffee, the casual tone in her voice, even the lightness in her laughter, it all felt just a little too practiced. But I didn't let on. I smiled back, nodded at her jokes, and kept the conversation going like nothing had changed. Meanwhile, my mind was racing, filing away every observation like puzzle pieces waiting to be put together. Later that day, at the construction site, I tried to focus on work, directing the crew, checking materials, going through the motions. But my thoughts kept drifting back to Megan. That's when something unexpected happened. I was grabbing supplies from the back seat of my truck when I spotted it, a sleek, silver lighter tucked between the seat cushions. It was engraved with the initials F. Here's the thing, I don't smoke. Megan doesn't either. None of our close friends do. And I knew for a fact that lighter hadn't been there before. I picked it up, rolling it between my fingers. It wasn't just the object itself, it was what it represented. A detail out of place. A sign. When I got home that evening, I decided to bring it up casually. No accusations, no suspicion in my voice. Just a simple question. While rinsing dishes in the sink, I called over my shoulder, "Hey, did someone leave a lighter in the truck?" Megan glanced up from her phone, her reaction so quick it almost seemed rehearsed. There was the slightest flicker of something, hesitation maybe, before she replied, "Oh, that must be my brother's. He borrowed the truck last week, remember?" She laughed it off like it was nothing and reached out her hand. "I'll take it." I handed it over, saying nothing. But inside, my mind was working overtime. Sure, her brother had visited recently, but I'd cleaned out the truck since then. No way that lighter had been there all this time without me noticing. Still, I let it slide. For now. Later that evening, we were sitting on the couch. She was scrolling through her phone, and I was pretending to watch TV, though my attention was anywhere but the screen. Then her phone buzzed, a text. She glanced at it, her face tightening ever so slightly, before she flipped the phone face down and silenced the vibration. It wasn't the first time she'd done that, but tonight it hit different. My gut told me to pay attention. "Who was that?" I asked, keeping my voice light, like it was no big deal. She shrugged, offering a quick, dismissive smile. "Wrong number." Her answer came too fast, like she'd rehearsed it. But here's the thing, I'd caught a glimpse of the number before she flipped the phone over. And when she got up to grab something from the kitchen, I quietly jotted it down. I wasn't about to confront her based on a hunch. I needed more. And thanks to the wonders of the internet, there are plenty of tools to look up a number. I didn't know what I'd find, but I wasn't leaving anything to chance. The next evening brought another curveball. Megan was usually home by 6, like clockwork. But 7 rolled around, and there was no sign of her. I didn't text. I didn't call. I didn't want to raise any red flags. Instead, I sat there at the kitchen table, just watching the clock, letting the minutes tick by. When she finally walked through the door, it was almost 8. Her hair, normally neat and perfectly styled, was slightly tousled, like she'd been running her hands through it. Her blouse had faint wrinkles, not the kind you get from sitting at a desk all day. She breezed past me with barely a glance. "Traffic was a nightmare," she muttered, heading straight for the bedroom. I followed her, leaning casually against the doorway. "Must have been brutal," I said, my voice light, as if I wasn't studying her every move. She paused, then let out a small, nervous laugh. "Yeah, and the elevator at work jammed. My skirt got caught on my bag. It was a whole mess." Her explanation was quick. Too quick. And she was eager to change the subject. As the days passed, the puzzle pieces started to fit together. The lighter. The strange phone call. The late night. On their own, they might have been nothing. But together, they painted a picture I couldn't ignore. I realized then that observation alone wasn't going to cut it anymore. I needed to be proactive. If Megan was hiding something, I was going to find out exactly what. She thought she was being clever, covering her tracks. But she didn't know me as well as she thought. I'm not the kind of man who misses details. And now, I had more than enough reasons to dig deeper. The waiting game was over. From that day on, I knew I couldn't just sit back and wait for more signs to fall into my lap. Whatever was going on, Megan wasn't going to hand me the truth wrapped in a neat little bow. I had to dig for it, piece by piece. I started by tightening my focus on her daily routine, nothing too obvious, just subtle observations. If she was hiding something, there'd be cracks. People always leave traces, even when they think they're being careful. Her mornings were the first thing I noticed. Megan had always been the type to rush through them, barely functioning without her coffee. But suddenly, she was different. More alert, more cheerful. She hummed while pouring her coffee, cracked jokes over breakfast, and even dressed a little sharper for work. Nothing dramatic, just enough for me to notice. The extra effort wasn't for me, that much was clear. Then, there was her phone. She'd become glued to it, texting with that faint little smile she probably didn't even realize she had. And when I was around, she'd either flip it face down or tuck it into her bag like it was some classified document. She'd never been that guarded before. But the real kicker came a few days later. I was heading out to the construction site when I noticed something odd in the back seat of my truck again. This time, it was a scarf. Not Megan's. It was thin, floral, and smelled faintly of perfume. Definitely not the scent Megan usually wore. My truck isn't exactly a taxi. Aside from Megan and the occasional coworker, no one really rides with me. So, where the hell did this come from? When I got home that evening, I decided to bring it up in the most casual way I could. "Hey, babe," I called out while tossing my keys on the counter. "Did you leave a scarf in the truck? Or maybe one of your friends?" She glanced up from her laptop, and for a fraction of a second, her face registered something. Surprise? Panic? Before she quickly covered it with a shrug. "Oh, that's probably Jess's. She borrowed your truck last month when hers was in the shop, remember?" "Jess?" "That was Megan's friend from work." "Sure, she'd borrowed my truck once, but that was weeks ago. And I'd cleaned the truck since then. No way that scarf had been sitting there unnoticed all this time." But I didn't challenge her. Not yet. I just nodded, muttering something about dropping it off the next time I saw Jess. Later that night, her phone buzzed again. She was in the shower, and normally, I wouldn't have even glanced at it. But my curiosity had reached a boiling point. I didn't pick it up, just leaned over slightly and saw the preview on the screen. The message was from someone saved as Andy, and it read, "Last night was amazing. I can't stop thinking about you." My stomach twisted. But I kept my cool. When she came out of the bathroom, wrapped in a towel, her phone still lit up with notifications, I acted like nothing had changed. I didn't want to give her a reason to start hiding things even more than she already was. The next day, I decided to take things up a notch. While Megan was at work, I did something I never thought I'd do. I went through her old stuff. She had a drawer in the study where she kept random odds and ends. And buried beneath a stack of old receipts and tangled chargers, I found it, a second phone. One she never mentioned, one I'd never seen before. I hesitated, staring at it for a moment. My hands were sweaty, my heart pounding. This wasn't who I was. But I needed answers. It still worked. No password. What I found on that phone made everything crystal clear. There were messages, dozens of them, between Megan and someone named M. The conversations weren't long, but they didn't need to be. They were filled with phrases like, "Can't wait to see you," and "Last time was incredible." There were even plans for secret meetups, details about avoiding certain places where they might run into people they knew. My chest felt tight as I scrolled through. It wasn't just the messages, it was the pictures. Some were innocent enough, selfies, random shots of coffee cups and sunsets. But others, not so innocent. Megan in that same sleek black dress she'd worn the night she claimed to be treating herself. Smiling. Posing. For him. I sat there for what felt like hours, phone in hand, staring at the evidence. The dots weren't just connecting anymore, they were screaming in my face. But I didn't confront her. Not yet. Instead, I took photos of the messages with my own phone. Evidence. Proof. I needed to know exactly what I was dealing with before I made my move. That night, Megan was as sweet as ever. She asked about my day, made her favorite pasta dish, even poured me a glass of whiskey. She laughed at my jokes like nothing had changed. But everything had. I smiled back, played along, tucked my anger deep inside where she couldn't see it. Because this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. After finding that second phone, everything changed. It was like seeing the world through a cracked lens. Everything still looked the same, but now it was distorted, tainted. Megan carried on with her routine, blissfully unaware that I knew the truth. She'd kiss me goodbye in the mornings, text me sweet nothings during the day, and curl up next to me at night. But beneath it all was this invisible wall between us, thick with lies and betrayal. I wasn't sleeping much. My mind was constantly racing, trying to make sense of it all. But I wasn't just stewing in my anger, I was planning. I knew I couldn't rely solely on the messages I'd found. I needed more. Concrete evidence that couldn't be twisted or explained away. So, I decided to get help. I reached out to an old friend of mine, Derek. He wasn't a private investigator by trade, but he had a knack for digging up information. Back in the day, he'd helped me track down a contractor who tried to screw us over on a job site. If anyone could uncover the details I needed, it was him. I met Derek at a small bar on the edge of town. The kind of place where no one asked questions and the drinks were cheap. We sat in a corner booth, and after a few minutes of small talk, I laid it all out. Megan, the second phone, the messages from M. Derek listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally. When I was done, he leaned back and gave me a long, thoughtful look. "You want to catch her in the act?" he asked, his voice low. I nodded. "I don't just want suspicions. I want proof." He agreed to help, and we set up a plan. Derek would tail Megan for the next few days, track her movements, see where she went when she said she was working late or out with friends. He'd document everything, photos, videos, timestamps, whatever it took. Meanwhile, I kept playing the role of the clueless husband. Megan didn't suspect a thing. In fact, she seemed happier, lighter, like a weight had been lifted off her shoulders. She started dressing up more often, going out with the girls at least twice a week. Every time she left the house, my chest felt like it was caught in a vice. But I'd smile, tell her to have fun, and watch her walk out the door, knowing damn well she wasn't going where she said she was. Derek's first report came in after 3 days. She wasn't going to dinner with friends. She wasn't staying late at work. She was meeting him. His name was Matt. Tall, athletic, the kind of guy who probably still thought he peaked in high school. Derek had photos of them together, laughing over drinks, holding hands as they walked down the street, sneaking into cheap motels that charged by the hour. It was all there, in full color, time-stamped and undeniable. Seeing those photos was like taking a punch to the gut. I'd suspected it, sure. But seeing it, that made it real. I stared at the images for hours that night, flipping through them over and over until the faces blurred together. Megan's smile in those photos wasn't the polite, forced one she gave me after a long day. It was genuine, carefree, the kind of smile she hadn't shown me in years. And that's when something in me snapped. I realized I wasn't just hurt. I was angry, furious, even. But not the kind of anger that makes you yell or punch holes in the wall. No, this was colder than that. Sharper. I wasn't going to lash out. I was going to get even. The next day, I started laying the groundwork. I gathered everything. Derek's photos, the messages from her secret phone, even the receipt from Riverside that had kicked all of this off. I organized it all neatly into a folder on my laptop, labeled innocently as work stuff. I started paying closer attention to her schedule, memorizing the time she'd leave the house, when she'd get back, when she was distracted enough for me to snoop without getting caught. One evening, while she was in the shower, I went through her purse. Hidden in a small zippered pocket was another receipt, this one from a jewelry store. Not a chain, but an upscale boutique downtown. The date matched one of the nights she claimed to be out with the girls. She'd bought a watch. A men's watch. I didn't own anything like it. I snapped a photo of the receipt, put everything back exactly how I found it, and waited. A few days later, she started acting different. Jumpy. Nervous. Like she was expecting something to happen. I could see it in the way she'd glance at her phone with this tight little frown, or the way her smile didn't quite reach her eyes anymore. And then, one night, it happened. She came home late, claiming she'd been stuck in traffic. But her hair was a mess, her blouse slightly wrinkled, and there was a faint mark on her neck, just below her collarbone. A mark she hadn't bothered to cover up. I stared at it, my heart pounding. But instead of confronting her, I smiled. "Rough day?" I asked, my voice as smooth as ever. She nodded, pouring herself a glass of wine. "You have no idea. Oh, Megan. If only you knew." That night, as she slept beside me, blissfully unaware, I made a decision. I wasn't just going to catch her. I was going to destroy her. After that night, the line had been drawn. There was no going back, no room for doubt. Megan had crossed it, and I wasn't about to let it slide. She thought she was the puppeteer, pulling the strings, weaving her little web of lies. But what she didn't know was that I'd been quietly unraveling that web, thread by thread, until all she had left was the illusion of control. The days that followed were a masterclass in pretending. I played my role flawlessly, the loving, oblivious husband. I kissed her goodbye in the mornings, texted her sweet messages during lunch, and listened to her recycled stories about work when she came home. But behind that mask, I was planning something she'd never see coming. I decided to hit her where it hurt the most, her sense of security. Megan had built this double life with careful precision, thinking she'd covered all her tracks. She believed she was untouchable. My job was to show her just how wrong she was. The first step. I needed more leverage. The evidence I had was good, but I wanted airtight proof, something she couldn't wriggle out of with her smooth words and fake tears. Derek suggested we track her phone. Not just the secret one, I already had that covered, but her primary phone, the one she clung to like a lifeline. It was surprisingly easy. People are careless when they think no one's watching. A quick software install while she was in the shower, and suddenly I had real-time access to her location, texts, emails, everything. And that's when the floodgates opened. She wasn't just seeing Matt. There were others. Different names. Different faces. Some were casual flings, quick meetups in hotel rooms, vague work dinners that turned out to be anything but. Others were more involved. Long text threads filled with emotional garbage. "I miss you. I can't wait to see you again. You make me feel alive." The kind of words she hadn't said to me in years. One message stood out, though. It was from Matt, Friday at 8. Same place. "I need to see you." Perfect. That Friday, I told Megan I had to work late. She didn't even pretend to be disappointed. Just gave me a quick peck on the cheek, grabbed her purse, and left without a second thought. Derek and I followed her. She drove to the other side of town, to a trendy little loft above a bar, one of those places that tries too hard to be cool, with Edison bulbs and overpriced cocktails. She parked, checked her reflection in the rearview mirror, and walked inside like she owned the place. We waited a few minutes before Derek went in, posing as just another guy looking for a drink. He wasn't gone long. When he came back, he handed me his phone with a fresh set of photos. There she was, sitting at a dimly lit table, laughing, her hand resting on Matt's arm. They looked like a couple. Comfortable. Intimate. Like strangers to me. I stared at those photos for a long time, not because I was heartbroken, I'd moved past that, but because they were the final nail in the coffin. The proof I needed to end this, once and for all. The next morning, Megan was back to her usual routine, making coffee, scrolling through her phone, humming some song under her breath. She had no idea what was coming. I waited until after breakfast, letting her think everything was normal. Then I casually mentioned I'd found something interesting on my truck's dashcam, just to gauge her reaction. She froze for a fraction of a second. A blink, really. But I saw it. That flicker of fear. She recovered quickly, laughing it off. Oh. What was it? Oh, nothing, I said, smiling. Just some footage I thought was surprising. She didn't ask any more questions after that. But her behavior changed. She started checking her phone more frequently, glancing at me out of the corner of her eye, her smiles tighter, more forced. She knew something was off. But she didn't know what. That's when I set the trap. I told her I'd be going on a weekend work trip, an overnight stay for a project a few hours out of town. She acted supportive, kissed me goodbye, told me to drive safe. But the moment I left, Derek and I circled back. We parked down the street from the house, out of sight, and waited. It didn't take long. Less than an hour later, a car pulled into the driveway. Matt. Of course, it was him. I watched as he walked up to the door, let himself in like he'd done it 100 times before. My jaw clenched, but I stayed put. This wasn't about catching them in the act. Not yet. It was about watching them fall into the illusion that they were safe. We gave them an hour. Then I walked up to the door, keys in hand, like I'd forgotten something. I didn't bother knocking. I had my own house key, after all. The door swung open easily. The look on Megan's face when she saw me standing there? Priceless. She jumped up from the couch, her expression cycling through shock, guilt, and finally, panic. Matt scrambled like a kid caught sneaking out past curfew, grabbing for his shirt, stammering something about leaving. I didn't say a word. Just stood there, taking it all in. Their betrayal laid out right in front of me, undeniable, raw, pathetic. Then I pulled out my phone. Hit play. The screen lit up with every photo, every message, every time-stamped piece of evidence I'd collected. Their little affair, documented down to the minute. Megan's face drained of color. She opened her mouth to say something, probably to spit out some excuse, but I cut her off with a single word. Save it. I turned to Matt, who was already halfway to the door. You should go. And he did, without looking back. After Matt stumbled out the door like a scared teenager caught sneaking out, Megan stood frozen in the middle of the living room. Her face was a chaotic mess of fear, panic, and guilt, emotions she'd always been so good at hiding. But now she was exposed, stripped of her lies, and I stood there with all the power she thought she had over me. I didn't say a word, just stared at her, my silence louder than any accusation I could have thrown. She finally broke it. Jake, I can explain. I let out a dry, humorless laugh. The kind that comes from deep frustration mixed with disbelief. Explain. What exactly? The part where you've been screwing around behind my back? The lies? The late nights at work? Or is this the part where you cry and play the victim? Her face crumbled, but she didn't stop. She stepped closer, reaching out like she thought she could still reach me. Jake, please. It was a mistake. I didn't mean for it to happen. I still love you. I stared at her, my expression flat. I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, just a cold, hollow emptiness. You don't love me, I replied sharply. You love the security, the comfort, the stability I gave you. But love, that's not what this was. She burst into tears, falling to her knees like some cliché out of a bad drama. But then, just when I thought I'd seen the worst of her, she snapped. Her sobs turned into rage, her face twisted with fury as she shot to her feet. You're such a pathetic bastard, Jake, she screamed, her voice raw with venom. She stormed across the room, grabbed her purse, and yanked it open with shaking hands. From it, she pulled out something I never could have expected, a used condom. She held it up like some twisted trophy, waving it in my face. "This is what I have to do to feel alive. This is what it's like to be with a real man," she spat, her eyes wild with rage and something else, pride. For a second, I just stood there, stunned. Not because I was heartbroken, I was way past that, but because of the sheer insanity of the moment. It was like watching someone completely unravel, right before my eyes. I didn't flinch. Didn't react. Instead, I calmly reached over to my phone on the coffee table, hit the record button, and let her continue her meltdown. "Is this what you wanted, Jake? To ruin my life?" "Ha!" she screeched, pacing the room like a caged animal. I kept my voice steady, low, like I was talking to a child throwing a tantrum. "Megan, calm down. Calm down. You think I'm going to calm down?" She laughed hysterically, still clutching the condom like it was a weapon. "I deserve better than you. You're nothing." I let her words hang in the air, knowing every second was being recorded. Every insult. Every disgusting display of her true self. When she finally collapsed onto the couch, exhausted and sobbing into her hands, I stopped the recording. I walked over, knelt down in front of her, and said quietly, "You're right about one thing." She looked up, her face red and swollen from crying. "I am nothing to you. But now, you're nothing to me." I stood up, grabbed the envelope of evidence I'd prepared, the photos, the messages, the receipts, and dropped it on the coffee table with a loud slap. "I'm filing for divorce," I said flatly. "And trust me, Megan, I'm going to make sure everyone sees the real you." She broke again, this time with pathetic sobs and gasps, reaching out like I was supposed to save her from herself. But I didn't. I just walked out, leaving her with nothing but the mess she'd created. Thank you for visited my YouTube channel. Your support, likes, and comments truly inspire me to create even more engaging content. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. You're a part of this amazing community, and I'm thrilled to share my stories with you. See you in the next video on YouTube.